Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be discussing a retrospective on a Star Trek trilogy. This is a crossover trilogy. It was released in 2016, which coincided with Star Trek's 50th anniversary, and this is the Star Trek Prey trilogy. To begin talking about this, I should first start by saying that this is very different than the other Star Trek trilogies that I've read, or series. You have the trilogy like the Destiny trilogy, which completely blew up the Star Trek universe that had billions of deaths of characters with the Borg and their creation and their ending and all that stuff that happened. And then you had the Fall, where it was a 5-book series and each individual book felt standalone while still at the same time being part of a greater series. And what made The Fall so interesting was that you had the Archduke Ferdinand moment at the beginning where they kill off a major character, and that leads to a lot of repercussions of potential war and fighting and Cold War attitudes. And then at the end of the series, they kind of wrap it all up and put the new characters on new paths going forward. This trilogy sets up momentous items and things that are happening, and then promptly wraps them all up. One of the things that John Jackson Miller is known for is putting all the toys back in the box. He has a unique ability to write a story that is huge and epic, and yet you can skip his stories and it's not like you're missing a major thing, because he doesn't take the time to kill a major character because he doesn't feel that's his job oftentimes. There are character deaths in this series, but not in the same way that there are in David Mack books or Dayton Ward books or David R. George III's books or things like that. And so this is very unique in that aspect. I would call it a standalone trilogy. This trilogy, however, does cross over many of the Star Trek characters and TV shows that we all love. The primary show that it follows is The Next Generation, and it's pretty obvious when you read the trilogy that it follows The Next Generation. But it's not exclusively that. You also see the characters from TOS, the original series, show up, and it's fantastic. You also see characters from Deep Space Nine show up throughout. You also see characters from Voyager show up. It is a big, epic crossover in that sense. But one thing that this trilogy did was celebrate Star Trek. There are big homages to the Star Trek movies. Oftentimes, you pick up any Star Trek book, it's referencing a specific episode of television. It's supposed to be a sequel, or they'll say, I based my book off this episode of television, things like that. This trilogy, however, really connects more with the Star Trek OG movies than it does with the television shows. Particularly, this series has to do with Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. The reason for that is, of course, the Klingons. This trilogy is called Prey, P-R-E-Y, not Prey, P-R-A-Y. It's called Prey because it's referencing to birds of prey, which are very prevalent in this trilogy. If you look at all of the covers for the books, birds of prey are on every single cover. That was very deliberate, and that is because the Klingon society is explored here. Many Star Trek authors have delved into Klingon society. One of them, Michael Jan Friedman, wrote one of my favorite Star Trek books, Kahless. I thought it was a fantastic book. And then I know that authors like Keith DeCandido have done many books and short stories featuring the Klingon society. But this trilogy is all about the Klingons and about the House of Krug. If you've seen Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, you know that a certain powerful Klingon dies at the end of the movie. And this book trilogy explores what would have happened to the House of Krug. This book series also realizes, hey, this is the 100th anniversary of that episode, of that movie in the timeline. That movie took place in about 2286-ish, and this trilogy takes place in 2386. And so they celebrate the 100th anniversary of the battle that led to the downfall of the House of Krug. And the battles in this trilogy are fantastically written. The pacing is phenomenal. And the exploration of redemption is unparalleled, except perhaps in a very few Star Trek books. This trilogy really goes into, okay, how much should we be blamed for the sins of our previous generation? How much of that is our responsibility? How much of that can we be absolved of? And how should we handle moving forward beyond this? The Klingons in this trilogy are expertly written. They have that kind of martial, serious tone while still not being a caricature. He nails the attitude, which is the most important. And he also created new Klingon words and worked with Klingon specialists so that it would actually fit, so that he wasn't just coming up with something on his own. It actually worked in the dialect of the Klingons. And so it just feels like you're reading about the Klingons in this book. He nails every aspect of the tone. And then you have all the other characters. The primary characters in this, of course, are Jean-Luc Picard and Worf. Worf really takes center stage in this trilogy. And I'll be honest, I didn't love Worf in the Next Generation TV series. I thought that he was poorly utilized. I thought he was kind of flat and boring. He's very well written in this trilogy, and he is the moral center. He is the one person who knows what's happening and is the one person who knows how to fix everything. And I just enjoyed every moment that Worf is on the page, and he's on the page quite a lot. As I referenced earlier, Kahless, the Unforgettable, shows up in this book. And the trilogy, and he is so much fun to read about, and he just has this attitude that has this almost traditionalist attitude, which is just refreshing, and I enjoyed every moment that he was on the page. Another thing that this trilogy does really well, as I mentioned earlier, is it incorporates other characters. The first book is really about the Enterprises, but the second book focuses on the Titan, and then the third book is a true crossover, but the Aventine finally shows up. And what he's able to do is, in the second book, it kind of almost felt like a Titan novel. It really did focus on William Riker and his whole crew there, and it was John Jackson Miller is one of the very few authors that truly understands Riker as a character. I would say that the other person that really gets him is James Swallow. The two of them are probably the best. But in this trilogy, Riker has a arc as well as Worf, even though Riker is a much smaller character. And then what really just gets this trilogy going is the way that it tells political storylines. One thing I was disappointed in the fall is that they were setting up something big. All right, the Typhon Pact has assassinated someone important. All right, it's the Archduke Ferdinand moment. Let's go to war. And no war ever comes. You had Raise the Dawn, where they literally blew up Deep Space Nine, and we still didn't go to war. And so this was an instance of, okay, these Klingons are actually causing battles. They're building up their arsenal. They're announcing themselves. They're truly getting ready for war. And while true war never actually breaks out, battles do. And it seems like if a renegade group were to try to artificially start a war and fail, this is what it would look like. And so it's just, everything in this book trilogy is great. I've said before on the channel, and I'll say it again, John Jackson Miller is my favorite media tie-in author. He's my favorite Star Wars author specifically, and also my favorite Star Trek author. And what makes his books so good is that I have a fun time reading them. I can't put them down. When I read this trilogy earlier this year for my reread, I was reading them so fast. And that is very rare for me with Star Trek books. I want to take some time and truly delve into them properly. This trilogy, I could not devour it fast enough because it was just such a fun experience. And that is what I can promise you will have reading this trilogy. And I think that this trilogy, it doesn't get referenced When you read later books, they really don't talk about this trilogy much because John Jackson Miller really made it self-contained. He does wrap it up really nicely. It's not like some series where there's a lot of dangling threads. This trilogy is completely wrapped up. But sadly, I don't think it's ever going to be mentioned on a pedestal among fans the way that Destiny, or the A Time 2 series, or the Typhon Pact, or the Fall, or even the new trilogy, the Coda trilogy, is referenced among most fans because it didn't do that much to the overall universe. At the end of this trilogy, things go back to normal. But the characters change in subtle ways, and it's very important. And you can't negate that. And even the characters, you see some of their reactions in the Coda trilogy, even though they never reference this trilogy itself. You see the changes that they've gone through, which is one reason why it's so great. So this is, as I've said, my favorite Star Trek trilogy. It is utterly fantastic. No matter what era of Star Trek you will like this trilogy. He nails every aspect that he needs to, and so I highly recommend it. So this is the third video in my retrospective series, and I highly recommend it. Let me know what you thought of the Star Trek Prey trilogy by John Jackson Miller. Let me know if it's your favorite or your least favorite. Tell me how you would rank and all those types of things, and if there's a trilogy or series that you think I should read in Star Trek, and I'm very open to reading more. And I love reading Star Trek, can't read enough. And so, until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.